Greetings, bloggers, vloggers, followers, and potters. Dustin here from Dustin's Dynasty, here at you with another week, another episode, and it's been a good week. And if you haven't been here long enough, I've seen we got some new subscribers. I want to thank you for that and for joining our group. And I'll tell you a little bit about myself. In a middle-aged man. I've been living this autism thing, I think, most of my life, although I was diagnosed at 13. I've been living independently for the past 7 years in this current situation for the past five, and I've had a part-time job for over 15 years now, all while living everything else that's going on in my life and living the dream as an autistic person who is living independently, has a part-time job, and thrives very well. And, life just shows its way among things, and we find our way out of them and where we need to go and what we need to do. But we keep on pushing on. And today, that's kind of what I want to talk about in this week's vlog. I want to talk about, getting up and going through it and getting up and getting through it and fighting, the struggles that we as autistic people can face when we are in a point where we are ruminating, looping, whatever term you use for it, and these thoughts that come to us, and we think about anything and everything that is in our mind or in our memory, and how we may have to face something like a fear or having to do something that is routine, like working or going to day program or even going to school if you're younger and listening here. Sometimes anxiety, which is often related with being autistic, and I am no exception to that rule, it often plays havoc on our brain, and it often makes us want to avoid things sometimes, or maybe it makes us want to fight it, and or cause us to flee or run away from things. And for me, when my anxiety kicks up, one of the big things that happens to me is that I want to run away from it. I want to avoid it. I want to find reason to, um, you know, get out of something because it may seem uncomfortable for me. It may, I may think, the worst possible thing that can happen in that scenario. I can maybe, and maybe sometimes I do fight it. And when I say fight it, I don't mean literally fighting, like punching something. I mean literally maybe using my words in a way by saying something that can be misstrued or maybe a little hurtful. And sometimes when that comes across, to someone, it can come across as, you know without us maybe being known as, just maybe we're having a bad day, or maybe we're having these feelings about something, and because we're having these feelings, we're not thinking correctly. We're not applying our filter or our brake to what we need to say and what we need to do about, finding our way around, what we're saying or how we're reacting to something. And it can come across very rough and sometimes very blunt, where people can be easily offended, react, do things like that. And it hurts. It hurts them, it hurts you. You may not feel the hurt in the beginning, but eventually you do, and you think, boy, I shouldn't have said that. I really should have rephrased the way I said that comment or that word. And the way I may have said it may have been hurtful, or maybe it wasn't intended to come out of my mouth because I wasn't thinking, I was overthinking, or I was just wanted to fight what I was thinking with, how can I get out of this situation, or I don't want to deal with this situation. Sometimes we don't think about that. And in other instances, we can think, you know, we want to avoid something because, it can seem like it's too much for us, or that we can't get through the anxiety that we are experiencing. Maybe the anxiety is overtaking us and wanting to control what we need to do, or what we know we are capable of doing. And in fact, we may have done it several times in the past, or maybe we have the skill set to do the things that we know we need to do, or what is expected of us. And we our anxiety can flare up like just like something, and it can show in many ways. Sometimes it does things that you can't even imagine. Like, it can cause GI issues, and that too can keep you back, and you feel so nervous, like your stomach's in knots, or you just can't seem to shake what you're feeling about, what's in your mind about wanting to avoid something that really, when you get to experience it, or when you do it because you've done it time and time again sometimes, or maybe you just know that that's what you do. It goes away and it dissipates, and you can do what you do because you know you can, and you feel at ease once you get into something, and you feel very confident about it. Sometimes, things happen in our lives where we have to be expected to do things that do make us feel uncomfortable or uneasy, or make us want to avoid things because we don't feel comfortable, or we don't feel easy about them, or we just want to avoid them at all costs because we're afraid we may even say the wrong thing, or we may react in a way that is not appropriate, or that we're just going to freak out because maybe we want attention. Sometimes there's millions and millions of thoughts that, in the time that we're thinking these things, that it's just over compounding sometimes, and it's ruminating, and it's rolling like a big sticky ball, and a big rubber band, like a rubber band is hitting on top of one another. And sometimes those thoughts can hold us down, and they can make us feel just horrible, and to the point we're laying in bed, where we're in a ball sometimes, where I like to go under a blanket, and sometimes I can stick under that blanket for a good half hour, and if I don't bounce back from that, sometimes it can be a good hour if I'm really not focused on doing what I need to do. And I have now come to the point in my life where, because of family issues and whatnot, that I do have a lot of downtime. So I have to find things and avenues to fulfill that time and make that time useful, from the time I get out of bed until the time I go to bed. And granted, there are days that I do, sleep. I do go and do things like go to work, go to day service, go to, my support groups, and I'll do a thing here and there. But there is some time in a little bit of each day where there is a void of time, where I have to fulfill that time and try to stay focused, and try not to be so down and out about myself, because maybe I don't want to go to work tomorrow, maybe I don't want to go to day services, maybe I can think the worst case scenario in each and every one of those, and think that maybe there's a reason. Maybe anxiety can flare up that much, that bad, that you feel so horrible about doing things that you know are so customary, and that when you get there to what you have to do, the point where you have to get to do what you have been known to do and be able to do, you feel very you feel like you're in your vibe. You feel like you can do it. You feel like you can be on top of the world and overcome the struggle that you thought you would face maybe 12, 14, 16, 18 hours ago. And that you know, and you did all this worrying, you did all this pushing, all of this, you know, all this overthinking, all for what? Nothing. Maybe you overthought things. Maybe you overthink things. And a lot of autistic people can overthink things. They think about every possible scenario, and often every possible worst case scenario about something, or what they can do, or what can happen if they would go and do this or do that. And if you're given more than one option when wanting to do something, that just makes it even more compounding, and more things. And sometimes we think about the things that we had, or the things that we did, and we think, well, I don't like where I'm at now. Or maybe, I feel like I'm in the worst possible situation or scenario that I could be in for myself. So, sometimes it takes the good old fashioned making the pros and cons list. That takes, being more cognizant of, you know, are things really better now? Or is it just my mind telling me that? And the same can be said for doing things in the future. A good old fashioned pros and cons list is one of my go-tos when it comes to thinking, what's the alternative? What's better? What's worst? One of my key tech favorites about making a pros and cons list, and especially when you have two different options, is to put them each in a column. But what's good is green, and what's bad is red, so that you can differentiate how many good things you have about each situation, and how many bad things you have in a situation. Obviously, the end goal of that would be to have whatever many green things or good things in one or the other situation, would be the one you would think would be better. And that's not always the case, but you break down each quality or trait about something, and you really boil that down, and you think, hey, I can do this. I think all these things, but I can really do them. But oftentimes we do feel like crap about things. We feel like we've been given the raw deal. We feel like, things just aren't what we want to be in life, or that we can't do this, or we can't do that. And sometimes we even downplay ourselves so much. And it's like somebody told me a few weeks ago about all that they had heard about all the great things that I do, and how much of an asset I am to this, that, or the other thing. And I want to jokingly laugh and say, well, I don't want to take credit for that. But in the right mindset, I would have taken credit for that. I would have owned up to that and been extremely grateful that somebody said that to me, because sometimes when we don't hear these things, or we don't want to believe these things that are told, that are often true about ourselves, and that we're actually being brave and putting ourselves out there and fighting through what we have to do the things that many neurotypical people, or people who don't have challenges like we do, go out there and do. And we overcome our own struggles by going out and doing these things. We show them that we can be boss and we can do this. And over the past few years, there have been many, many things that have changed in my life. And I can name several of them right off the bat. Changing the way I go to work in day services, having new supervisors, new program people come into my life, and still in some ways being uncertain about what goes on in that arena. Maybe having to do my job differently, or having things happen at day services differently. Those things, when you're so accustomed to things being so set in for so long, it can be hard to accept changes that you know that you have to do. You know you can be brave enough and do them, but just getting through them and overcoming and showing that you can be brave and do them and not let your inner critic be the worst of you and make you feel like a sack of crap is just it just speaks volumes in that arena. There's times I often think, there will be times every day that I would sit and I'd think about overthink and I'd ruminate and I'd want to run away from my problems, or I'd find every little detail that is wrong, about something, or wanting to avoid something just because, I can't stand one thing or another. And how hard, I think things really are when they're not, and overcoming that struggle of getting out there and doing it and being brave and not saying no or not wanting to avoid something out of plain fear and without a valid reason as to why something is hard for me. Pushing through is one of the hardest things, but it can also be one of the strongest things you can do, because you think you've all this doubt that's always building in your mind. You think you can't do it for this reason, that reason, whatever. And sometimes you just want to say, you think in your head, how am I going to say, get me out of this situation? Get me out of here, get me out of here. And sometimes there's people in that same very room when you think about playing that out, that are going to say, no, you need to stay, you need to do this, because I know you can fight through this fear and build that confidence and have that bravery that you need to have to get through what you're fighting through. And it's just anxiety kicking you in the butt, and you need to do what you can do. And I think sometimes we need to hear that in ourselves, that we need to kick through, we need to kick anxiety in the butt sometimes, or what we're overthinking or what we're ruminating. We need to say, this is not valid. This is not true. This is not what is really going on. Sometimes we don't even know what's really going on. Sometimes we're not privy to those things. Sometimes what we think can be a completely whole other thing than what somebody else thinks, what somebody else is thinking, and it may not even be the same subject or the same person or the same thing. But we have it often in our minds that it's the worst thing, and they're out to get us, or something bad is going to happen. We're always living. It feels like when you're autistic and you're living with anxiety, it feels a lot of times that you are in fear of what is going to happen. You are in fear that something bad, you're never entitled to nothing good. You're never entitled to be happy or feel confident or feel brave, that there's always something that's gonna come and kick at you, and it's gonna hit you hard, and it's gonna put you down like nobody's business. But you know what? Today, I woke up today and I said, you know what? I'm going to be happy today. I'm going to focus on the good today. I'm not going to let the nastiness kick in. I'm not going to let myself, build in and wallow in my self-pity and feel sorry for myself and feel down and out about myself. And you know what? Majority of the day I was pretty good. There were a few, maybe one or two small moments that were a little and maybe they were like a half hour in length. But you know what? I worked at distracting myself. I worked at getting out of the rough parts of that. And even that even includes getting on here and talking about it to you in my weekly vlog. Thankfully, it's Thursday, but I can talk about it and I can share it with you, how hard it can be in those moments. You feel like, you're not getting out of this gloom and doom that you're in. You feel like you're in this cynical canister of, and it's like a vacuum. Sometimes I would often relate to it with being with family or something like that, but sometimes we're in a vacuum of our own thoughts, and all we can think about is, getting away from it or avoiding it or not getting in parts that make us feel uncomfortable. But we can't sit and let that brew within us. We have to get up, we have to get rolling, and we have to find something to do to keep us engaged and going and get our mind out of that gutter of denial and out of self-pity and feeling sorry for ourselves and having our tale of woe. We just got to get out of that, folks. We gotta do better about that, and I am one included. I know I need to do better. I know I need to focus on having a positive mindset. Happiness is a choice. We have to choose within ourselves that we have to stop fighting this negativity so much and believing in it so much and start believing in the positive and that we can learn and we can grow from it. So I want to thank you for listening today. I know I went a little longer, but I felt I had to get my points across because there's so much that can bring us down in life and as an autistic person and make us feel down and out. And sometimes that's what the trend can be right now. So, that's what we're dealing with. But I want to thank you again for listening. I hope that resonates with somebody. And I do again want to thank my subscribers. I seen we had a nice jump. We're over 130 now, and I really appreciate each and one of you on YouTube. I don't know how many's out there on the podcasting platforms or watching via my website, but if you haven't already, be sure to like this video, tap that notification bell, subscribe, give a review, whatever you can do. If you haven't already, be sure to follow me on Facebook, Instagram, X, and Pinterest. That handle is Dustin's Dynasty. There's also Dustin's Dynasty on TikTok. I am teetering along with that. Like I throw a little message out there every day. I don't really talk a lot on there, but I do throw little things out there every day. Also, I'm on the internet. That's where you'll find my daily blogs, www.dustinsdynastyusa.com on the internet. And lastly, I have a link tree with all this information. You can find my podcasting platforms. You can find my socials. You can find my important information that on the internet that I feel is good. You can contact me, sign up for my email list. That handle is Dustin's Dynasty under Linktree. We're coming up on the Thanksgiving energy, and I know the energy is coming upon us. I'm already feeling it. Next week will be Thanksgiving, so if you're heading away next week or whatever, and you don't catch my podcast next week because I'm off a few days next week, so I'll do it sometime. I want you to have a happy Thanksgiving. Take time to enjoy yourselves. Stay safe out there. Remember, you are loved. You matter. You are enough. You're amazing. And we'll talk to you soon. Bye for now and have a good weekend. Stay safe, everyone.